Hi, everybody. So now we're going to move on to chapter 2, which is rational numbers. So if you haven't already noticed, chapter 2 is essentially the same as chapter 1, except we're working with different types of numbers. So rather than just integers, we're working with rational numbers, which are fractions, decimals, all that stuff. So let's just review some definitions. A rational number is a number that can be written as a fraction where a and b are integers and b is not equal to 0. So, if you need a little reminder, take a look at this chart over here to the right. It's a good way to see what whole numbers are, what integers are, and what rational numbers are. Most of the rational numbers we're going to see are going to be fractions and decimals. Okay, so a terminating decimal. Just to remind you, a terminating decimal is one that ends. Okay, so what that means is some examples: 1.5, negative 0.25. 10.625, okay? It ends. A repeating decimal is one that has a pattern that repeats. So what that means, so let's say you type in the calculator and you get negative 1.333333, and it just keeps going on and on and on. Well, what we're going to do with that is we're just going to write one of the threes and write a line over it. That's the line represents a repeating decimal. So over here we have 0.151515. Well, I can see that it's the 15 that's repeating. So I'm going to write 0.15 and put the line over both numbers since that is the one that is repeating. All right. So how do we convert a fraction to a decimal? Just a reminder, how do we do it? Well, let's take a look at this example, negative 2 1/4. First thing that you want to know, this number right here is always going to stay the same. Okay, that's an integer. So you don't have to change that. Whatever the whole number is, that's going to stay on the left side of the decimal point. Okay, always, always, always. The fraction, what do we do with the fraction? Well, the fraction is always going to be to the right of the decimal point. And how you're going to get that is you are going to do 1 divided by 4 in a calculator, and that's going to give you your decimal point. If you do 1 divided by 4 in your calculator, you should get 0.25. But remember, our whole number is negative 2, so that's on the left. So we just write everything that's to the right of the decimal point. So that would be 0.25. So negative 2 1/4 written as a decimal is negative 2.25. All right, how to convert a decimal to a fraction. So let's say you're given negative 0.26. Well, your negative sign always stays the same, okay? The next thing is you need to note where the last digit, what place value the last digit goes to. So let's remind you of the place values. This is the tenths, okay? This is the hundredths. And if there was another one, it would be the thousandths to the right. But I see that the last digit is in the hundredths place, okay? So that means what I'm going to do is I have the negative sign, I have my fraction line. I write whatever is to the right of the decimal point goes in my numerator, okay? So to the right of the decimal point. So that always goes in my numerator, whatever's to the right of the decimal point. Then my denominator is essentially has to do with the place value. So since the last digit is in the hundredths place, my denominator is going to be 100. Okay? And that is since the last digit is in the hundredths place. Okay? If the last digit was in the tenths place, we would put a 10 in the denominator. If the last digit was in the thousandths place, we would put 1,000. And then the last step that you always, always want to make sure that you do is you need to simplify, okay? So I would not leave this like that because I see they're even numbers. So I would need to reduce the fraction and simplify before I box it in as my final answer. All right? Okay, ordering rational numbers. What do we do for ordering rational numbers? Well, the easiest tip that I have for you is convert them all to decimals. Okay, so you're going to want to do what I taught you up here, how to convert a fraction to a decimal. Do that, get them all in decimals, use a number line. That's going to be the easiest way to do it. So convert them all to decimals. This is the only time that I will ever tell you to convert fractions to decimals. Because if you're doing any sort of problem where it's a fraction, I typically want you to leave it in fraction form. But this is the one exception. Okay, 2.2. So 2.2 and 2.3 is adding and subtracting rational numbers. Just to remind you, these are the same rules as 1.2 and 1.3. So adding integers and subtracting integers. So same exact rules. But a couple reminders about adding and subtracting fractions. The first very important reminder is you must have a common denominator to add and subtract fractions. Okay, you have to have the same denominator. You have to have a common denominator. Okay, and the second thing, when you're adding or subtracting decimals, you have to line up the decimal points. Okay, so they have to be stacked right on top of each other, those decimal points, okay? Or you're not going to get the right answer. All right, so that is pretty much the most important thing for adding and subtracting. The other thing, if you're given a mixed number, you need to convert it to an improper fraction first before you get started. Okay, so that's always going to be your first step if you're given a mixed number. All right. Okay, so let's move on. So that's 2.2 and 2.3. Then finally, 2.4. All right, multiplying and dividing rational numbers. That is going to be the same rules as 1.4 and 1.5. Okay, and just a reminder, what those rules are is if you're multiplying or dividing two numbers with the same sign, okay, with the same sign, your answer is always going to be positive. If you are multiplying numbers together that have different signs, your answer is always going to be negative. Okay? All right. And then just a couple reminders about 2.4. All right. Couple reminders. Okay. So a couple reminders are to multiply fractions. To multiply fractions, you need to multiply the numerator with the numerator, and then the denominator with the denominator. We also call this the butterfly technique, but essentially it's going straight across. You're multiplying the top together and you're multiplying the bottom together. Then the second reminder, when you are dividing fractions, okay, if you are dividing fractions, you are going to remember our rule, which is keep, change, flip. Okay? And the proper lingo would be to say multiply by the reciprocal. Okay? To divide fractions, you are going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay? So those are your reminders for chapter 2. Remember, if you're given it in fraction form, you want to leave it in fraction form. If you're given it in decimals, leave it in decimals, unless you're converting, unless you are ordering numbers. Okay, that's your one exception. But that is the review for chapter 2. Make sure you have that down in your notebook.